So now I think it's time to start. Welcome everyone to this Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock webinar called Animal Health and Welfare, Good for People and Planet. And the purpose of the webinar today is to highlight the launch of the GASL booklet, Animal Health and Welfare for Sustainable Livestock Systems. My name is Sandra Norborg. I'm a veterinarian working at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in the field of antimicrobial resistance in livestock production, and I will be your moderator today. In today's webinar, we will meet the authors of this GASL booklet, Professor Ulf Magnusson from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, Dr. Rebecca Doyle, Senior Lecturer at the University of Edinburgh, also working at the International Livestock Research Institute, and Dr. Timothy Robinson, Senior Livestock Policy Officer at FAO. Author is also Associate Professor Sofia Boqvist at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, who unfortunately could not join us today. Before leaving the floor to Professor Magnusson, I just want to tell you that the webinar is being recorded. And further, you are most welcome to use the chat to interact with each other. There I will also post some more extensive presentations of the authors, as well as a link to the publication. And at the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A session with the authors. So if you want to ask a question, post it in the Q&A function and not in the chat. And before your question, please also introduce yourself and write who the question is for. With that all sorted out, I will stop sharing my screen and hand over to Professor Magnusson.
Thank you, Sandra. I will share my screen then. Yeah. Let's see. So, yeah, good afternoon if you're in Europe, good morning if you are on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, or good evening if you are further east. So this is a booklet that the four of us have produced under the umbrella of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock. The Global Agenda, just for those of you who are not familiar with that one, is was created in 2011 as a multi-stakeholder partnership that aims to foster a dialogue, build consensus, and support policy and practices change towards a more sustainable livestock sector. Currently there are 121 member organizations from producers, research, academia institutions, NGOs, social movements, and community-based organizations, public and private donors, and intergovernmental organizations, which allowing a multitude of different perspectives. We think that is an important aspect of exercise like this, to have different perspectives. And the agenda as such has taken on a livestock system approach to address the economic, social, and environmental livestock issues or sustainability issues, and adopted the 4 sustainability domains that the FAO presented at the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture in Berlin 2018. And these are, the first one is food and nutrition security. The second one is livelihood and economic growth. And I think it's fair to stress here that livestock is not just another agriculture commodity. It has very large social implications. There are ethical aspects, traditions, maybe also religious aspects in it. And then animal health and welfare, that is us. And finally, also climate and natural resource use. And when it comes to climate, it's important to stress that it's, of course, also a mitigation issue, but it's also how the livestock sector could adapt to the changing climate. So we will focus here on animal health and welfare. And these two entities do interact and synergize together. Animal health or freedom from disease is a big part of the welfare of the animals, and vice versa. Good welfare supports good health for animals, and together they support good productivity of the livestock. So today's agenda: first, our colleague Dr. Timothy Robinson from FAO will talk about trends and disruptors of the livestock system and the diversity of livestock systems. Then I will talk about non-zoonotic livestock diseases and antimicrobial resistance. And unfortunately, I will talk again about zoonosis and foodborne diseases, including pandemics or epidemics. It's our colleague, Dr. Sofia Boqvist, who's produced that sections, but she is suffering from a terrible flu at the moment. So we apologize for that and hope that she will recover soon. And then Dr. Rebecca Doyle from the University of Melbourne and International Livestock Research Institute will talk about animal welfare. And then at the end of the presentations, Dr. Timothy Robinson will talk about synergies and trade-offs versus these other three sustainability domains that I just mentioned. So we will try to take on an approach where we discuss different issues, opportunities, and risks within these different aspects of animal health and welfare, about innovations and also implications for policies. And if we miss out something, please, or if you have different opinions or whatever, you are most welcome to ask in the Q&A function at the end, as Sandra Norborg mentioned. So I think I stop the sharing here and back to you, Sandra.
Thank you, Ulf. And I will hand over the floor then to Dr. Timothy Robinson, please.
Thanks very much, Sandra. And thanks for the introduction, Ulf. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
That's good. So I'm just going to provide a little introductory commentary on the trends and disruptors in the livestock systems of the world, and talk a little bit about the diversity of livestock systems and the importance of taking that into consideration. So there are various, the livestock sector, livestock systems are very dynamic, and they respond to various drivers. Population growth is one of the most important drivers. We've already reached 8 billion people in the world now, and by 2050, it's projected to increase again, still quite dramatically, to about 9.7 billion. So all of those new mouths will need feeding, based on the limited resources that we have now. Changes in wealth also affect livestock. People who tend to be wealthier tend to consume more livestock products because they're relatively costly and luxurious. So that causes greedy GDP growth in wealth, and access to finance. Household cash tends to increase demand for livestock products, and differently for different livestock products as well. The population is also urbanizing at quite a significant rate. In about 2007, the rural population, the urban population took over the rural population, and most of the growth in population now is occurring in cities and urban areas. And that, of course, is very different because people living in the cities aren't generally producing stuff, they're just consuming. So that changes the structure of systems and the nature of demand as well. And globalization is another important driver because the world is much more global pace, and very differences across regions tend to become less and less as globalization continues to occur. Now, the upshot of all of these drivers is that there's a growing demand for livestock products. And that growing demand, that rapid demand, is also causing changes in the way that livestock are produced, and the livestock sector transformation. So there's increasing intensification. There are structural changes, so that often we see vertical integration, where big firms are producing feed and products themselves and marketing themselves. And we're also seeing a much greater movement of livestock and livestock products. So all of this dynamic situation, this causes concerns over sustainability, and all introduced these 4 domains of sustainability: food and nutrition security, livelihoods and economic growth, animal health and welfare that we're focusing on here, and climate and natural resource use. And livestock have very, very important roles in each of these areas, and they present important opportunities in each of those 4 areas, but they also present risks and concerns that need to be addressed. So really, our role is to understand sustainability in its entirety, and not to focus on one particular aspect of it, because to be sustainable, a food system really must address all of these concerns, all of these areas of sustainability. Now, on top of those general trends, and we've seen a lot of this recently, there are significant disruptors to food systems, and these can come along unexpectedly and throw a spanner in the works. Now, climate change is something that's been going on for a long time, but I think it's really just in recent years that we're taking this more seriously as a population and seeing the actual effects in our day-to-day lives. We're seeing forest fires, droughts, floods, extreme temperatures. These things are all becoming much more part of our daily routines, and there are very few people, I think, nowadays who would deny climate change. So this is a big disruptor, and this is changing food systems. We have disease outbreaks as well. Avian influenza is a good example of that, which causes massive disruptions to supply chains. Zoonotic risk and pandemics. We've, of course, all been living through the last few years with COVID, and we've seen the enormous impacts that can have on livestock systems. And more recently, we're looking at political unrest and war, and we can see how that can have a massive impact on food systems around the world. For example, increasing costs of inputs such as grain for poultry production and so on. And then large-scale migration is also a disruptor that may result from some of these other things, and will change the shape of demand for livestock products and disrupts food systems. So on top of the general trends, we have these less predictable disruptors that also cause problems. Now, issues occur differently in different parts of the world and in different production systems. So it's important to look at the diversity of livestock systems when we think about these sustainability. And we can think of livestock systems in 3 broad categories. Some are extensive, so a lot of land, relatively little labor, relatively little capital input. These are the sorts of pastoral systems that we see. And that's one type of system. Tend to be not very well connected to markets. There's also labor-intensive systems, and these are often mixed with crop systems, and we see these sorts of systems usually fairly small holdings where there's a lot of livestock, a lot of people, a lot of interaction between the people and the livestock and other aspects of the farm. And then we see much more specialized capital-intensive systems. And these tend to occur in modified environments, very high focus on productivity, very, very commercially oriented in terms of sale of produce, compared to the other systems, extensive and labour-intensive systems, which often have the livestock often have rather different roles from just being raised specifically to sell. So we need to take into account the different systems, and we can also use various methodologies to map these systems. And we can see that the labour-intensive systems are very popular, are very common and widespread in much of Africa and Southeast Asia. And we see these capital-intensive systems much more prevalent in Europe and the United States and Australia, for example. And the extensive systems we see in the drier areas of north and south of Africa, for example. So it's important to understand and take into account the diversity of production systems when thinking about sustainability. And that's all I will say about that as an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that overview and introduction. And with that, I will once again hand over the floor to Professor Magnusson, who will talk about nonsynotic livestock diseases and antimicrobial resistance. You are muted, Ulf.
Now, okay, about these non-zoonotic animal diseases, those are the diseases that just affect animals, and I will also talk a little bit about antimicrobial resistance. And this is a kind of intro, the first slide. Animal diseases, one way to describe them, it's how contagious they are. We call these transboundary animal diseases. These are the highly contagious ones with trade implications and so on. The classical one is foot and mouth disease, and here we see on the small pic there the carcasses burning in the UK in the 2001 outbreak there. And also we have these constantly present endemic diseases that are around all the time, and these could vary by different settings. And also it's important to remember that not all diseases are infectious diseases. So several of these endemic diseases are not caused by microbes. And also, as most of you know this for sure, but it's important to stress, I think, the more we use antimicrobials, the bigger is the risk that antimicrobial resistance develops and spreads further and making this drug ineffective. And also that the antimicrobial resistant bugs or their genes may be transmitted to humans. That is a risk. We don't know how prevalent that is, though, but it is a risk. And over the last, let's see, 5-10 years, I should say, it has been an increasingly focus on the AMR issue, so to say, both in animals and in humans, of course. So a little bit about issues and risks. Good animal health practice is a good thing to fight diseases or control diseases. But there are several reasons for not implementing these ones. And those could be due to a lack of resources, a lack of opportunity to develop the competence of producers and authorities or professionals, poor access to animal health service related to that, traditions and cultural issues, or among producers or governments or other stakeholders, doubts whether they contribute to increased profit, if it's worthwhile economically. that are such concerns around. In this capital-intensive system, biosecurity, that is the protection from pathogens or infections coming to the animals, is usually very, very high, and the risk of contagious diseases is low in general. However, once an infection enters such a farm, the spread is very serious and very quick. In small-scale, extensive livestock systems, on the other hand, biosecurity is generally low. In such farms, however, often they do have several livestock species which mitigates the risks of a total catastrophe. In many countries, antimicrobials are used regularly for disease prevention in healthy animals, and also are available over the counter without professional prescription. And also in some settings, veterinarians are getting a substantial share of the revenue for selling antimicrobials, and that could serve as a perverted incentives when it comes to reduce the use of antibiotics. And it should also be stressed, which is very important, as Tim pointed out, the contexts are very different, that in some settings there's a lack of appropriate and quality controlled antimicrobials. It's not always freely available. So a little bit about the economics, just to get a perspective here. This previously mentioned foot and mouth outbreak in the UK in 2001 has been estimated to cost about 13,000 million US dollars. And in a World Bank report, they project that there will be a 10% drop in production in low and middle income countries by 2045 if we continue to use antimicrobials as we do now, because of the antimicrobial resistant issue. And here is one of these not so good animal health practices. It's livestock markets. It's a perfect vessel for spreading diseases, and it happens regardless geographies. Here's from the UK and from Afghanistan, and it seems to be a very male exercise, regardless geography. A little bit about opportunities and innovations. There are several technologies like diagnostics, vaccines, traceability measures, information and communication technologies for reporting and response of diseases. And when it comes to these technical solutions or innovations, there are more investments in technologies that are relevant for the high income countries than for low and middle income countries. This is a big difference in inequality there, which should be acknowledged, I think. Or we should be aware of that. But technology is not the single solution. Organization is almost equally important for livestock keepers, for cooperatives, extension service, veterinary service, I mentioned beforehand, and also capacity development of these different kind of professions. And also conceptual thinking or approaches that, for instance, that antimicrobials shouldn't be used to compensate for shortcomings in animal management. And some slogans around this is that prevention is better than cure, and healthy animals don't need antimicrobials. I apologize for being a little bit trivial here, but I think it's relevant to say this. And even though I'm a veterinarian here and mainly working with things like curing animals or effective or promoting biosecurity and vaccinations, and so I think the bottom here in this pyramid towards good prevention of infectious diseases, this good animal husbandry is utmost important. We tend to forget that, and to have space, to have water and feed, and good animal welfare is a part of that as well, to support the animals so they become robust and so. And animal or veterinary services, I mentioned that could be similar and different. Here are some pictures from both from Sweden and from South Sudan. So a little bit then finally about implications for policy. Policy instruments can take various forms. They can characterize as sticks, carrots, or maps, and combination of these. And I will give some examples here. Control movement of animals and animal products to prevent the spread of certain diseases. These are international agreements around these. And also it's important to overcome financial barriers to innovation in animal health. For instance, governmental support to vaccination programs is such an example, and also investment in R&D. Another one is, of course, improved control of infectious diseases. For these that are ever present, these endemic ones, comparing to the transponder animal diseases, these highly contagious diseases, there are different motivations by governments, by other stakeholders, and I mentioned the international trade agreements. But it's diversity here, depending on which disease we're talking about, the motivation. And reduce the use of antibiotic and use them in a medical rational way. That could be supported by good policy. However, poor compliance and lack of capacity for enforcement may make this regulation inefficient. So positive incentives might be far better and efficient. So this is just a pick from our university barn, actually. We're using narrow spectrum antibiotic as the first choice. I think I will stop share here and move to Sofia Boqvist's presentation. Sorry. Sorry for this slight delay. So we are soon there. So let's see. So now we're on track. Zoonosis and foodborne diseases in the One Health context is the heading of her presentation. However, many measures and concepts and challenges for these kind of diseases overlaps with those for non-zoonotic diseases and antimicrobial resistance. Healthy animals are less prone to spread zoonotic diseases. That is important to remember, even though it's a no-brainer in some way. Some zoonosis may have an epidemic or pandemic potential among humans. Others are endemics. So we have this kind of division of diseases here as well. And we should also remember that about 2/3 of human infectious diseases are zoonotic, not necessarily coming from livestock, but they could, most of them come from wildlife, like bats and so, as we know from the recent outbreaks of diseases. or pandemics. And it's a generally higher burden and risk for humans in low and middle income countries. And this is due to that people in low and middle income countries live often closer to their animals, more contact, and also that the disease burden in animals are higher there, so there are more presence, higher presence of these diseases in livestock there. A little bit about issues and risks. One aspect that we often forget, I think, is that zoonosis usually get more attention from the public and authorities than other livestock diseases. So more financial and organizational resources are put in place to control them. It is more generally more cost efficient to invest in surveillance and control of zoonosis in the animals at source than in humans, and it's also a geographic dimension in this. As we all know, pandemics may cause enormous human suffering and economic and social dislocation. But besides this public health issue, similar to the transponder animal diseases, there are trade restrictions, direct production losses, and indirect losses resulting from control measures, such as the culling of infectious animals. That is a mean that we use. And the endemic zoonosis, the localized, are often overlooked and as being among the background in livestock keeping. So we tend to ignore them and just letting them go. And these are some chicken from a farm in Vietnam. So a little bit about foodborne diseases. This is just to point out the importance of these ones. Foodborne diseases is estimated at causing 33 million dailies, which is similar in magnitude as those of HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis. So this is an important aspect, actually, or kind of disease. The highest burden are on children below the age of 5 worldwide. Many originate from animals or be introduced during the processing and marketing of animal source food. So the longer the value chains are, the multiplies the risk of contamination. If a short value chains, the risk is less. Wet markets are at particular risk, but also large supermarkets with poor hygienic standards is also a risk, since there are more consumers exposed to the food there. So I move on here. For foodborne diseases, the new traceability measures, ear tags, databases, make it possible to track an animal from birth to abattoir and supermarket shelf, thereby containing outbreaks. Technologies are rarely sufficient. Effective organization and professional skills are equally important, as I mentioned before. Adequate regulation and guidelines, again, taking the context in account for implementing biosecurity measures and food safety standards. General government seems to take greater responsibility for controlling zoonotic and foodborne diseases than ordinary livestock diseases. I mentioned that previously. Like for TADs, measures such as culling, movement bans, and quarantine may be unpopular but necessary. And our experience is that reasonable compensation schemes are a key for success. And it's best to tackle these issues on a One Health approach that different ministries must work together, which not always is the case, and it's a challenge. And a well-functioning veterinary service and collaboration across institutions are key together with enforcement of adequate food safety standards. So I will stop there and go back to you, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulf, for highlighting these connections between disease prevention and antibiotic use and AMR, relevant for both the non-zoonotic and zoonotic diseases and implications for policies at different levels. And also thank you for taking on Dr. Boqvist's presentation. Now we will move on to Dr. Rebecca Doyle, who will talk about animal welfare. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Sandra. And thanks to Ulf and to Tim for setting the scene already while I put my presentation up. So I wanted to take a step back actually a little bit from some of the content in the document, because obviously you have access to that, which is just amazing. You can hopefully follow that up in good time. And I wanted to give a little bit more of a broader picture look at why animal welfare is actually important in sustainable livestock systems. And specifically, I wanted to do that because I don't think that there is maybe enough detail known about it and enough examples at a broad level on why it's important. So to start with, there's significant links being drawn between livestock, fish, and working equids, the welfare of these animals and sustainable development goals. There's a number of different publications that are available that can help guide this and provide evidence of this, as well as the document that we've prepared. So I think that's a really important component, that there is, genuine connection between animal welfare and sustainability along these SDGs, as an example here on the right hand of the slide. And as a component of that, it means we need to kind of be addressing animal welfare in more directly than we have been, and specifically because animal welfare and health go hand in hand, but they are not synonymous with each other. So for example, good health, well, I would describe good health as being essential for good welfare, but animal welfare is more than just good health. And that's where practices around animal husbandry are particularly important. The environment in which we're raising those animals is important as well. And it's because that's important for a number of different reasons. Not only is it helping to improve the health benefits and the productivity benefits that that Ulf has described up until now, but in addition to that, it's also because animals have the ability to experience pain and feelings, and that means that they have a stakeholder. They're a stakeholder in this relationship, and so it needs to be addressed and considered for that reason as well. So there's a number at a global level. The role of animal welfare and sustainability has been gaining more focus. A number of examples of this at a high level is this year there was a United Nations Environmental Assembly resolution on animal welfare that recognised the connection between animal welfare and animal health in sustainability, and particularly environmental health as well. So that sort of three-way nexus. There's also a 2019 report, the Global Sustainable Development Report, that mentions animal welfare and the contribution it makes to sustainable development globally. And that's at this high level. We also recognise that public awareness is increasing and driving momentum around animal welfare, and that's detailed a lot in the report as well. Some examples of this include the development and progress in animal welfare that's being made across Africa as a continent. Things like the African Animal Welfare Congress that happens annually is extremely well attended and captures a lot of the kind of the regional specific issues on animal welfare. There's also other reports now and papers that are linking animal welfare to the SDGs. Linda Keeling, who's at SLU, but is also a member of our GASL Animal Welfare Action Network, highlights these in 2 of her publications. The International Coalition of Working Equids and also Delia Grace and colleagues in the last few years have highlighted the role of working equids and their welfare in contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's also that last paper there by Ozken as well is highlighting the role of animal health and welfare and livestock production systems and where those improvements could be made. So there's a few other references as well just to share with you. Now, one of the reasons I mentioned before is I think that there needs to be more awareness raising around the value of animal welfare in the sustainable development argument. So that's where animal products come from the consideration of the value chain. So improved consumer awareness can provide incentives for non-legislative improvements in animal welfare. And we see that happening across the globe, basically, where to take the poultry industry as a single example, but of which there are many, it's the awareness of consumers that have led to a significant change in poultry management in different countries and continents. And that's being adopted in a whole variety of different locations in different ways. And that's because driven by consumer awareness, and then is eventually followed up by legislative change. But what we recognize is that a significant amount of animal welfare progress comes from this consumer awareness that changes, drives production changes. There's also animal welfare's role in sustainable livestock from a policy action point. So we need some awareness raising around this, which is really what we're talking about here today. And then approaches for measuring and improving animal welfare awareness needs to be raised for that for implementers. So what I mean by that is that we know that improving how the information that farmers have, the information that people that are advising farmers have, and all the way up through to the higher levels in animal care and animal health management, have the ability to improve animal welfare. So raising the awareness of ways we can actually measure animal welfare, how it can be standardized, and all the tools that we have at our fingertips for measuring and improving animal welfare need to be more widely circulated. And again, to mention that in the document that we're talking about, there's a huge number of examples of that too, where it lists the types of tools that we can use for animal welfare, both from a very progressive end, through precision livestock farming, which is a significant innovation, but very capital intensive, down to just the fundamental approaches of being able to measure animal welfare by observing an animal and simple record keeping, and how that can contribute to animal welfare improvements, and then leading on to animal health improvements as well as part of that awareness raising. And I just wanted to highlight some innovation specifically, because I think that's where the most important gains will be coming from, and where more impact can be had. So we know that clean, comfortable housing, good nutrition and husbandry are preventative approaches for improving animal health and animal welfare. And Ulf has given some examples of this as well, where it's sort of that preventative action that can reduce the need for later intervention. And that can be intervention from the examples that Ulf was talking about with antimicrobial resistance or zoonotic disease spread, but it can also be prevention from things like food loss and product quality loss, actually having early interventions on how animals are cared for, the level of husbandry that they're provided with, and the stress that they're exposed to at different, crucial points in their development, productive life or slaughter, actually reducing those negative animal welfare interventions can lead to positive improvements in product quality, product longevity, and reduce food wastage as well. We have other key innovations are going to be improving animal welfare measurement, labeling, and transparency. And again, I mentioned that's where the consumer pull for improvements in animal welfare really strongly comes through. So not only is the consumer pull really important to encourage change in animal welfare, but actually having that clearly and easily communicated to the person at the end of the value chain, the consumer, is also really important if we're going to give that confidence in the product and allow that sort of those new market opportunities that improve welfare and improve livelihoods of farmers to flourish. And then finally, one of the other key innovations for considering animal welfare specifically is the non-economic value of livestock. So through a number of different projects that we have running at ILRI and running at the University of Edinburgh, we're understanding the non-economic value of livestock for animal owners and its societal benefits and society in general. Just to use as a single case study, we hold community conversations in Ethiopia with our smallholder farmers and pastoralist farmers as well. And they describe the benefits that they see from raising livestock. And of course, the food security and economic benefits are clear. And if, one of the key, obviously the key, or if not the most important thing that they raise is one of the values of livestock. But there's also a significant number of non-economic value that comes from raising livestock as well. So pride and connection and social status, all these sorts of things that are embedded in livestock that we don't necessarily measure or consider when we're thinking about making these improvements in animal health and welfare. And so again, being able to tap into that and understand that better, and then promote that as an approach for improving practices that improve health and welfare, I think is really critical as well. And then finally, I just wanted to use this platform to kind of raise the awareness about the Animal Welfare Action Network as a part of GASL, where we have a wide number of different stakeholders. The logos are on the right-hand side of the slide. And we're also really curious to hear about anyone that from the audience that would have interesting case studies on where they see improvements in animal welfare and productivity and sustainable development occurring. So please get in touch if you have any case studies on that. Thanks so much, Sophia.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that presentation and for bringing up the importance of animal welfare for sustainability from all these different perspectives and how to communicate this. With that, I will hand over the floor again to Dr. Robinson. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Sandra. So allow me, please, just to wrap up by talking briefly about the synergy and trade-offs between animal health and welfare and other domains of sustainability. Now, this slide just illustrates the issue a little bit. And very often the synergy and interaction can be a synergy or a trade-off, depending on how it's done. And if we look at the third row there, the animal health and welfare, that illustrates what I'm talking about. In that animal health and welfare, improved animal health can lead to better use of antimicrobials, but it could also, in terms of trying to address animal health problems, cause increased use of antimicrobials and therefore antimicrobial resistance. Better health generally would be associated with better animal welfare, but certain measures to improve health, confinement or something, for example, could lead to concerns about animal welfare. And whilst improving animal health will generally lead to better quality products and less would be rejected, increasing standards, for example, could lead to more food being rejected because certain producers are unable to meet certain standards. So I think that sort of the internal conflict within animal health and welfare can indicate that actions can lead to positive things or negative things even within the same domain. But generally, improving animal health has positive actions across, positive synergies across all of these four dimensions. It's just important to make sure that interventions do pick out those synergies and do avoid any possible trade-offs, such as food having to be rejected. Which could impact food and nutrition security, for example. But in general, for food and nutrition security, more food would be available. There would be lower food prices, resulting in better nutrition. So things are generally positive. As far as livelihoods and economic growth are concerned, again, mostly positive synergies with the greater contribution of the livestock systems to economic growth, improving livelihoods, improving resilience, protecting antimicrobial use for medical use, for example, and reducing zoonotic risk. But there could possibly be trade-offs in terms of making smallholders less competitive if they're unable to maintain these particular standards, resulting in less rural employment. And from an environmental perspective also, animal health interventions will generally be positive. They'll generally improve resource use and efficiency, excuse me, reduce emission intensities. Improving animal health can reduce greenhouse gas emissions per unit of produce, and will generally healthy animals will generally be better adapted to resist climate change. But there are also potential risks, and one thing that springs to mind is probably less relevant these days, but a number of years ago, trypanosomiasis was considered, for example, to protect the presence of tsetse flies and trypanosomiasis was considered to protect wild areas. And the removal of Tsetse and trypanosomiasis enabled farming to move into wild areas. So that's just a slightly abstract example, perhaps, of where caution needs to be taken when taking animal health measures to make sure that there are no negative or that negative impact trade-offs are minimized, and that always it should be borne in mind to try and build synergies across other domains of sustainability, because sustainable livestock systems must address all of these 4 dimensions of sustainability together. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tim, for wrapping up by illustrating the complexity in navigating among both trade-offs and possible synergies. And thank you to all of the authors and for your interesting presentations. Now we will move on to the Q&A session. So if you in the audience have any questions, please post them in the Q&A function at the bottom. But we will start with a few questions that have already come in here. And I will start with a question for Tim, actually. And that is it possible to prioritize one factor as being the most important disruptor for the livestock sector? Which of the different kinds of livestock systems do you think will expand and which will decline?
Thanks very much. I don't think it really is possible to point at one particular factor that will disrupt livestock systems. I think all factors could come into play, and we see different factors affecting different systems as well. So certain disruptors and so on will impact one particular type of system, but may have much less impact on another type of system. I think the second, remind me, Rebecca, what the second part of that question was. Sorry, Sandra.
Which of the different kinds of livestock systems do you think will expand and which will decline?
Well, I haven't got my crystal ball here today, so it's difficult to predict. But following existing trends, I think there will be a continued expansion, particularly of poultry systems. I think that poultry, that's where demand growth is probably most significant. And the other thing is systems like poultry systems can respond very quickly to rapid demand and to feeding populations in urban environments and so on, because they can be built up quickly. Ruminant systems, much more grassland based, for example, require time to build up herd sizes to establish themselves. I think there's the general trend is overall for a reduction in the meat, in particularly in beef, and I think growth in dairy is also growing. Dairy products is probably likely to continue to grow. So I would say, following existing trends, I think poultry and dairy would be the growth areas for the future. Small ruminants and beef production probably declining. And pigs are a bit like poultry. They grow, but they have restricted sort of geographical relevance in terms of providing food.
Thank you. We also have one question about animal welfare for Rebecca. Which factor do you regard as the most important for the differences seen in animal welfare around the world? Which is the most low-hanging fruit for improving animal welfare?
Oh, that's such a fantastic question. I would say, if I was to think about something that is universal, I would say the measurement and recording of animal welfare. I think that, again, you can't manage what you can't measure, or what you don't measure. And so actually having indicators of animal welfare that are components of day-to-day farm recording is going to be really valuable no matter who is using it. We, as an example, some of the work that we do at ILRI to embed animal welfare in the various livestock systems that we work in is taking the common indicators of animal health that maybe a veterinarian might be collecting when they're looking at reproductive issues in buffalo, or it could be some of the indicators, it could be records that you'll be keeping on farm for managing your stock tally data, and adding onto that some simple additional indicators that give more of a snapshot of animal welfare. Because if, again, thinking about animal welfare, it's health is a key component, nutrition is a key component, husbandry, and then behavioral opportunity. And so summing that all together. So in every production system, there are pros and cons to animal welfare. Nothing is perfect, no matter which system you're in, and there's always room for continuous improvement. So being able to record that is going to set us on that path for those improvements, no matter which system you're in.
Thank you. And then I have a question for Ulf about AMR. Which do you think are the key measures to curb the AMR emergence in the livestock sector? That's a big question, but perhaps you can try.
I don't think it's as simple as putting on new regulations, because the implementation, enforcement, and control, or the compliance to this are not perfect around the world. I rather think that developing positive incentives and also making farmers and producers understanding that this is not only a public health issue, it's also for the productivity of their animals if they lose the efficiency of the antibiotic. Because it's what we call a medical rational use of antibiotics or antimicrobials. It's good for the productivity and health and welfare of the animals, which should be in the farmer's interest, and focus on good health. I mean, the experience in Sweden, we have the lowest use of antimicrobials per animals in the European Union. Is that we focus on keeping the animal healthy, and the low use of antimicrobials is a kind of side effect, and that is interesting for the farmers. So regulations are good, but it's not enough.
Thank you for that, Ulf. With that, it's 2 o'clock. 1 hour has passed, and I would like to again thank you, all of the presenters, and to everyone in the audience. And I would like to give the word back to Ulf for some concluding remarks.
Yeah, you have heard my voice too much, so I will be super brief. But I think when discussing the sustainability of livestock, not only the animal health and welfare aspects, it's important to have trying to grasp this or acknowledge these different perspectives, these different contexts, and so that Tim so nicely presented in the beginning. That is valid, because sometimes it's very single-minded conversations, and so I think if that message came through, I think we will have a far more constructive conversation about the future of, or the role of livestock in sustainable food systems. And that is in the spirit of the global agenda for sustainable livestock. And I will also remind you that in the top of the chat, you have the link to the book. And thank you all for listening here today. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.